All right, let's kick off our second panel for the day. This panel is called Living Creatively. And this is the blurb. Creativity doesn't have to look just one way. In this Support Act-led session featuring psychologist Carly Dober and producer-manager Charlotte Abrams, we look at how to optimise your creative process and how to put tools in place to make sure you're entering the studio as your best self. That's what we want. We explore how different activities can help you reach your most creative output without sacrificing your well-being at the same time, and how nurturing the conditions around you can maximise your output. All right, is everybody seated and happy? All right, cool. I'm going to welcome Carly Dober to the stage, and she has a thing for you.
Can you all hear me? Yeah. Hi everyone. As stated, I'm Carly Dober. I'm a psychologist from Support Act. I'll be leading this session with my colleague Charlotte, who will also be keeping me to time because I can talk about this stuff non-stop. As we said, this is called Creative Minds from Support Act, Australia's largest music charity. Before we kick off, I'll just acknowledge that we are sitting on the land and talking and gathering on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their rich history of music, creativity, storytelling, and pay my respects to any First Nations people here today. So basically, we'll be talking about what creativity is, making music, making time for play to allow flourishing, because creativity can be stifled by languishing, poor mental health, packed schedules, stress. So how do we actually create the conditions in which creativity can occur? Setting the scene and relaxation, all things that can be a bit difficult to achieve in the music space, in production, but I'm asking people to kind of be mindful and think about maybe one thing you could take from today's session, because I think listening to stuff and thinking about it is really helpful. But if you hear something or you can connect to something that would be really helpful, write it down, talk to a friend about it too. We'll skip this because we're very short on time. But I guess I'd like you to think, being mindful, talk to a friend if you've got a friend next to you, and if you've rocked up on your own, that's good. But I'd really like you to be mindful and think about the last time you were really creative, the last time you were able to actually just connect to being productive, to making some music, or to thinking about how music is made. When did it occur? The last time you really felt truly creative? What were the conditions that allowed for it? What was going on in your life? And what wasn't going on in your life at the time? Who was around you? What was your schedule like? Because I think if we understand, again, the ingredient, the recipe list that goes into people actually connecting to their creativity, I want you to kind of make a relationship with it, get to understand it, get to know it, because if you can connect to that and plan for that, things can occur. Does anyone want to share the last time they were actually creative? And maybe this might remind people that there's been a bit of a gap in true creativity for them. I mean, a show of hands, who was creative in the last month? Love this for you all. Brilliant. Who hasn't been creative in the last couple of months? Thank you for sharing. And that can happen a lot. And I'm curious, what's happening in your life to make that creativity harder to access? You don't have to answer that, by the way. You can if you want to later with everyone, for sure. But, when there is a gap in creativity, that can be really difficult for artists, for creative people who feel joy from that element in their lives. This is a quote that my colleague Ash shared, because it's really important. It's not just creative for creative people, it's for creativity in humans in general. We have The brain, it's an amazing organ. It can do so much, but it is so sensitive. And creative people need to actually sit around and do nothing. I don't mean just sit there, look at your phone, scroll on, TikTok or Instagram and pay attention to stuff that isn't really helpful, but to do actually nothing, to sit there and have your mind wander, to daydream. Creative people do not need fully booked calendars, and I understand that can be there can be a tension point there, because a fully booked calendar means that you're networking, you're achieving stuff, you're doing stuff, which is really important in the creative space. It can also be like a bit of a double bind, because too much stress, too much time pressure, it can stifle creativity significantly. We've got decades of research, of neuroscience and psychological research to support that. Very difficult to put in practice. Creative people need to hear the world's heartbeat. Creative people need to hear stories and words that can inspire them to continue on with creativity, to get these ideas, to get this flow happening. Creative people need a space to think, feel, and be. So if I can be so bold to ask for another show of hands, who in the last month had time just to daydream and to do nothing? Love this for you all, but I notice a lot less hands than previously. Who in the last month didn't have a fully booked calendar? Okay, there could be many reasons for that, so I'm not going to make a comment on that. But who finds daydreaming, another show of hands, to be really important for their creative process? Yeah, exactly. That's the data, all I need to know. But if you can take one real thing from this presentation, how can I make it, in my life, in my week, in my month, where can I fit time in to do nothing? For my mind just to be able to wander, so my ideas can flow, so they can come, not all ideas you're going to act on, but that creative process, it really needs to have that time to occur. And I'm not musical. I love music so much. I adore it, but I don't have a musical, cell in my body. But for those who do, it's really, really important that you make space and time for it, because if you don't, that creative drought that can occur can go on for much longer than you'd like it to. And we know that creativity for artists is so good for your mental health, physical health, social health, emotional health. It's all, it's all tied up. As I was saying, how do you make space for time and play in maybe a schedule that doesn't allow it, or maybe when you're out of step with the process of playing and having fun? And we call this time affluence. Affluence refers to being rich in something, have a lot of something. And we know that you can't make more time, but what can maybe you shift that is in your schedule that would allow you to have more time to go towards the things that are truly meaningful and valuable to you? Like this idea of creativity, space for you to be able to do that. Time affluence is that white space in our schedules that provides space for play, a range of intrinsically motivated activities done for recreational pleasure, enjoyment, and curiosity. Not things that you just genuinely find joyful, whatever that might be. Everyone is different, but maybe if you think about your schedule in the last year, how much genuine fun or pleasure have you had? And it can be really confronting as an adult to think about that sometimes, because if you're in waged work, you might have children and you're doing that, there can be not much time for anything else, let alone fun or play. But it's really important, if we can, when we can, to make space for that in whatever pockets you have. Because again, research, studies have shown that play facilitates insightful, divergent thinking, in other words, creativity. It's very difficult to access that in a brain that hasn't had that space for just pleasure, joy, contentment, rest. And like I said, it's not only beneficial for creativity and productivity, but also for our mental health, physical health, and relationships with our family members and our friends. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm my most stressed, I'm not at my best. I can be short, irritable. You don't want to be around me. And I imagine it might be the same for you all. You at your most stressed, most overwhelmed, maybe not the best person to be around, but you relaxed, calm, creative, joyful. It's a better us to be when we can do that. So again, really thinking, You know, how do we take stuff from this discussion? How do we apply it practically into our lives? I can think of the next 4 weeks, right? You know, I imagine that you've got a lot of stuff that can't be moved in your calendar. That's life. But what's something that you miss doing that you haven't done in a very long time? You know, either by yourself, with friends, with a partner, with other family members. It doesn't have to be all day, it could be half a day, but how can you access that joy and fun? You know, and you have to make time for it. You have to kind of be committed to do it because life moves very fast. You know, weeks go by very quickly. And I say you can't ever make time because you can't get more time. It'd be great if we could. But it doesn't have to be a whole day, whole long weekend of doing this creative, fun, joyful stuff. We've got microplay, which is capturing pockets of opportunity. Now that could be in your morning, could be in your evening, could be on your lunch break, could be during the workday. But, you know, in 5 minutes, what can you do? You know, for me, it might be something like really short yoga flow, just for going for a walk. Could be hanging out with my animals, but in 5 minutes, what can you do? Because I think you're in the space now where you're paying attention, right? If you make a bit of a plan, you can pop it into action. In 5 minutes, what can you do with all the resources you have available that is interesting to you? And write it down somewhere, because if you've taken the thinking out of it, during the workday you can say, oh, I've got 5 minutes, I can do this. And if you've got 10 minutes, what can you do? And then 15 minutes, because this micro resting, the micro breaks, they're all incredibly important again. And then macro play, getting down to the real stuff. How much time can you reasonably spend engaged in different areas of all your creative tasks? If you could design your, you know, almost perfect week or month, what would it look like? This is about practicing production, experimentation, jamming, composition, marketing, everything related to your craft. And where can you make space, or where can you intentionally put space to allow for these periods to occur? Because again, like we said, life is very, very fast, especially when you're networking, trying to get things happening, trying to get gigs, trying to get work out. Life can be very fast, and I really do appreciate that. But what time can you put into this stuff just for you? Because it will flow in through everything you do creatively. And then you know, if you're all here and production or art, music, if that is your work and your play, well, what's the difference between the both? How do you differentiate between the both? Where does the line end from fun and work kind of end and begin? That can be really difficult to tease out because there's another bit of tension there. And defining work in a creative field for many can be really difficult because you might think that you're producing a whole bunch of music and it's fun, but it does feel like work. There's a lot of cognitive load in doing creative stuff too, especially when a lot of your income or your career is built around that. And, you know, they overlap, which I think many of you might have felt many times before. Again, where does that line really begin? How can I differentiate between what is work, what is true work, and then what is play and joyful and fun? And when are the times that they're coexisting together at the same time? So thinking about your own Venn diagram, how would you describe the relationship between your paid work and your creative work? What are the differences between the two? Are there any? You know, and there's no right or wrong here. This is just for you to really think about and consider for your own life. But are they distinct compartments? Is there a clear delineation between work and play? Do they overlap? Do they overlap a lot? Do both contribute to your sense of emotional balance? Or do you feel sometimes torn in different directions, a bit confused, a bit lost, bereft? I don't know what's work and what's play anymore, which can be really, really common in the creative space too. And then again, thinking about your own life and your own practice, can you identify moments in your career that have become drained and laboured? Because this is a real risk factor from creatives going from flourishing to languishing. You know, I'm doing a lot, I am being creative, but oh my God, it feels so hard. I'm not really connecting to the joy anymore. Why am I even doing it? You know, and that it looks like what began as a hobby, a joy, like an obsession, a love, now feels like work. It doesn't feel fun or joyful. And can you think of some examples perhaps in your own experience or in colleagues or friends' experiences where work and play were really blurred? Because it can be really difficult then to think, oh, how do I make space when it's all a mess, it's all the same stuff. And a vulnerable moment, you definitely don't have to, but can I get a show of hands of people who feel like right now it is kind of blurred, like they don't really know where work ends and play begins? Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And sometimes I feel like that as a psychologist as well. Like, I love mental health so much, but sometimes it's all I think about and all I do, and it's like, oh, who am I? Who am I without that? Another comment from my colleague Ash, which is amazing. Do what you love and you work super fucking hard all the time with no separation, no boundaries, and also take everything extremely personally. And this is probably when you're feeling burnout or approaching burnout very quickly. And I don't know if any of you have experienced creative burnout. Got to get another show of hands of that? Yeah. Thank you, Charlotte. And so again, how do we actually achieve, that delineation, or some of the delineation? It's never going to be perfect because that's not really life. But how are we going to get that separateness of play and work, if we can at all? Low stress environments, they encourage creative thinking. Have you ever tried to produce or create music when you've been super stressed, overwhelmed, everything feels like a chore? It can, for most people, feel very difficult to access that. But a mixture of concentration and relaxation aids communication between consciousness and subconsciousness. Like I said, the brain really responds to being relaxed. That's where creativity can really thrive. And stress dampens creativity. So again, if you only take really one thing from this, I'd really like you to take that. Again, we cannot eliminate all stress in our life. It's not possible, and not all stress is bad. Without stress, we wouldn't be able to grow, to thrive, to challenge ourselves, to take risks and opportunities. But it's that chronic stress, the stress that we don't really have much control over, that we don't really get a break from, that really dampens creativity. Rest, play, joy, low stress environments, they stimulate the production and the realization of ideas. You've got more time and mental capacity to take, like I said, these risks, do this stuff, see what happens. We want to find a space that prompts a sense of progress and allows you to acknowledge the small wins, whatever that is for you in your process, because without that, again, it can often feel like a bit of a drudgery, can feel like a bit of a chore, but you've probably all done creative, amazing things in your time, and I'm curious if any of you celebrate that, whatever that looks like for you. And we want a space that allows you to concentrate all your attention on a single task, because humans, again, amazing, brains are so good, but they are limited in what we can do. People might think that multitasking is easy, but switching between tasks is very cognitively taxing. And if I look at my phone after I'm writing something, it takes me 20 minutes to get my attention back from just looking at my phone. And so if you're doing that, without meaning to, when you're trying to be creative and have that process occur, you are impacting that flow. So just think about that. Again, you're going to need to look at your phone sometimes, that's life, but how can we allow you to focus your entire concentration on a single task? And where do you find a space that allows you to remain present with the meaning behind your work and why it matters to you? Why did any of you get into this? What does it actually mean to you? What's the thing that's keeping you motivated and driving you towards it? What's that intrinsic thing? Like, yes, money's great. We all need money to survive, obviously. But why did you want to do it? Why did you want to put your time to this and your energy towards this? Why? What's the point? And so I guess, how do you currently prepare for creative work? What is your process? What might you change? And are there moments or environments, spaces or places that help you feel more creative? Think about 5 things that influence your creativity. What are things that really nurture that seed and get it really flowing and flourishing? It'll be different for everyone. There'll be many similarities, I'm sure, many similar themes, but it's really important for you to understand the 5 key things that really support you to be creative. And then, think in terms of your 5 senses, hearing, seeing, smelling, touch, taste. Are there any tactile things that really can get you to connect with your creativity? What might that be? Some people love hearing different music. They'll go to a completely different genre show, or they'll talk to someone who thinks really differently to them, or they'll see something. But what are the things that factor into your creativity flowing? And don't be limited by what's happening now, your present life, because you're probably being creative forever. So are there positive associations with your childhood or places that you visited in the world, either nationally or internationally, that really get your creativity flowing? Really connect back to that. Another fab quote that really ties well to the creative space. It takes courage to say yes and rest in a play and culture where exhaustion is seen as a status symbol. And I guess that's where another tension point is in the arts as well, because so much of the creative space is about making connections, networking, going out and about, supporting one another, doing things. Also can leave people feeling really burnt out and exhausted if you're not having that downtime, that playtime, that fun time. So I'm certainly not saying it's easy. I'm certainly not saying drop it all, but what can be changed to support your creativity? Neuroscience as well, finding that when we are idle in leisure, our brains are most active. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it is true. And this is because the default mode network lights up, which, like airport hubs, connects the parts of our brain that don't typically communicate. Rest allows for this to happen. So a stray thought, a random memory, or an image can combine in novel ways to produce novel ideas. So neuroscience is literally telling you the benefits of rest and play are really important for the brain. So again, is there anything good that you enjoy? Is there anything you enjoy without pressure to be good at it? That can be a very confronting question for many creative types, but I'm curious. And I really want you to, again, think of micro relaxation breaks. What can I do in 5 minutes that can relax me so that my brain can just do what it needs to do? In 10 minutes, how can I relax so my brain can do what it needs to do? In 30 minutes, what might I do? And as I said, Support Act are one of Australia's biggest music charities. Please go on the website because there's a lot of free resources, not just for musicians, but for anyone in the creative space and their friends and family too. It's a truly community-led support resource. We've got regularly updated resources of evidence-based information, articles, videos, apps and book recommendations specifically curated for those who work in the music industry because it is very different, and Support Act really reflect that. And we also provide 12 counselling sessions for you and your family per year. Again, this is not just musos, this is everyone in the music space and their friends and family. It's free, it's confidential, it's available Australia-wide 24/7. So use it, because if you don't, may as well. Thank you, that's it for me for this part of it.
Thanks so much, Carly, for sharing your insights there. I've worked in this industry for a long time and I didn't know that there were 12 sessions available to anyone who works in the music space. So
use it and tell everyone.
It's amazing insight. We've only got about 15 minutes, but I wanted to talk about the concept of the mental load. I'm a producer manager. Probably more importantly, my partner's a producer as well, which has allowed me a lot of insight, not just into the process of what happens inside a studio, but also the mental load of carrying a record outside of the studio as well, and when that starts to interfere with life outside of work. I firstly wanted to ask you, Carly, from the perspective of a psychologist, can you define the concept of the mental load for everyone?
Yeah, the mental load refers to the cognitive tax that is placed by making more decisions than your brain really has capacity for. So, on a day where maybe you have, a normal day, your brain doesn't feel as exhausted and fatigued. But on a day where maybe you're parenting, producing, talking to different people, your brain is a finite resource. It has finite amounts of energy. It gets wiped out.
Yeah. And so my experience, having worked with both artists who've worked with loads of different producers, but also managing and consulting with producers, is that the mental load of a record or a song is huge. It's something that I've observed from the outside. It's something that combines so many different elements of someone's creativity, but also their identity. So while when I was asked to do this panel with you, Carly, I was thinking about the psychological aspects of producing and the main sort of pain points that I witness. And it's interesting that you spoke before about having a really busy schedule, because often from a producer's perspective, when the calendar is full, it's a good thing, right? It means there's a lot of work coming in, there's a lot of income coming in. But interestingly, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's been a producer for about 30 years, and he said to me, he realised after a while that he can't put a clock on creativity. So it's really interesting when you're self-managing, as most producers are, or for me as a manager, I always thought my role was to create timelines and schedules. But there are so many unpredictable elements of the workflow that you can't often plan for. And while I've tried my best to put together templates, we'll call them templates, that cater for every single scenario that might pop up, you still have moments where the album's about to be finished and then the artist decides they want to add a string section. And then, of course, the producer wants to do that because they want the best outcome for the project. That might then interfere with the mixing timeline, and then that interferes with the next project. And basically what I've witnessed happening with everyone that I work with, both from an artist and producer perspective, is that it's pretty much impossible to timeline this. So how do you, unless you are someone who is in a financial position who's able to just take on 1 or 2 albums a year, which not many producers are. So from your perspective, Carly, what would you recommend for both someone like me, who's a manager, who works with producers, and also for producers? Would you say that it's like a buffer or something that you put around a project? Or I'm sure you deal with this a lot, people feeling really overloaded by missing deadlines or having to catch up.
Yeah, it's a real tension point. And my first thing is like get an inheritance if you can. But that's not possible for 99% of people. So again, if we're thinking about those micro and macro breaks.
You'd be surprised though, because even if there is more money, the producers just upgrade the studios, they upgrade the gear, and then the same problem occurs again.
In that case, I'd say, where can you build in those micro breaks where you're not needing to use your brain so much? It's 10 minutes in the morning of just nothing. Turn your phone off if you can, to keep it on silent. Yeah.
And would you advise, speaking to a lot of musicians and producers all the time in my job, often a creative breakthrough might happen at 7 p.m. or something. So as much as we want to put boundaries around finishing at 6 p.m. and being home for dinner with a family, for example, it can't always be that way when someone's striving for the best product creatively. Would your advice be to kind of, when you're planning out a project, to cater for those moments possibly coming up and to cater for, say, a sleep in the next day? Because I think what happens is people often work till 3 a.m, but then they go, oh, we'll see you at 10 tomorrow again. And they don't really cater for breaks.
Definitely. We want people to be flexible enough to allow for that kind of flow that can come with creativity. There is an ebb and flow, and you would know yourself when it might occur, when it won't. But be flexible enough, and also, yes, like buffer or counteract when those flows might occur.
Great. I also just wanted to ask you about just communication in general. Another pain point that I've seen, I do a lot of consulting with artists, and that's a really interesting perspective because there's an issue that comes up a lot, which is that an artist is not actually happy with what's happening in a studio, but they don't feel that they have a voice to tell the producer. And often the song goes out, but the artist says to me, like, oh, I wasn't actually really happy with the results of the song. And so from my perspective, I'm like, why didn't you tell anyone? But I think sometimes in that moment, it's such a precious kind of role that everybody's playing, that if a producer is really excited about a certain path that they're going down, it's quite difficult for an artist to then stop them and say, oh, I don't really like it, without worrying that you might offend someone. So if you have any advice around communication in that sort of scenario from both the producer's perspective and the artist's perspective. But I think, given this is a room of producers, what advice might you have for producers to make sure that the artist is in line with what they're doing?
I think it's really tricky when creativity comes, because the passion can really come alive, right? And that might mean that people are really gung-ho about something. I guess understand from both perspectives that you might be going in completely different directions. Checking in early. What does an honest check-in look like with your collaborator or the artist? You know, not just like, oh, hey, you love it, don't you? Cool, bye. But like, hey, how are you feeling about this? Are you genuinely okay if we continue the way it is? A healthy dialogue and rupture will occur in all creative relationships, but it's about the repair. Difficult conversations are going to happen. People are going to feel anxious. But if you can actually move with courage, like towards that difficult conversation, A, you'll be much better to work with, and B, you'll show the artists and producers around you that it can be done. People might disagree, but
I think that that's the feedback that I get. More often than not, I hear these stories of artists feeling that they're walking into a space with someone who's really dominant over their ideas or their work. When an artist does have an experience where they're working with someone who does communicate really clearly and do kind of subtle passive check-ins, it makes such a huge difference to the artist feeling like they're in control of their own narrative, because at the end of the day, like, you know, they are the one paying for the product, and it is their likeness that is being used online. So it's really, really important that there are these regular check-ins, which I think, even as a manager, that's not something that I ever really plan for in a timeline or anything, but I think it's important to communicate upfront before going into a space about how to possibly tackle any kind of conflict that might arise in the space. We've got about sort of 8 minutes or so, and we wanted to create, a bit of a forum scenario. So if anyone has any questions to ask us, Jess, is Jess around with a mic? Anna's over there. Yep, there's a question up here.
Hey, that's a good point, checking in with the artist. It's always a bit of for me, I know if you're checking in with the artist and you're 2 or 3 days in and there's a certain amount of time left, and the artist just wants to take a complete left turn of where they were going, and you can see that it's going to be a train wreck. How do you, well, I know how I try and do it, but it doesn't always go that well. I mean, if you go to the artist's new direction and you try this new thing, you can just end up derailing the whole project. Is it some way to kind of fend that off and steer them in the right direction, because you know that at least you're going to get to the end result, to avoid that train wreck?
I mean, it does. When I've witnessed anything in a studio, it does seem like a real psychological game that you're almost playing to make sure that you are on the right path. But I think that if the artist wants something completely different to what you're working on, then you're in your own right to charge extra to kind of start fresh and go in a completely different direction, but just making sure that that's really clear. Because I guess at the end of the day, you want something that both you and the artist love. And if their other direction that they're going in is also something that you're going to love, it might add another week onto the timeline. I think it's completely fair enough to pose that scenario that's like, and this is what I do as a manager, which makes, Carly and I were just talking about this, it makes it a bit easier for a producer to have a buffer and say, oh, talk to Charlotte about that, because it's not an awkward scenario where the two creatives in the studio are talking about it. But what I would usually do in that sense is say, look, he's happy to do this, but it is going to add another week to the timeline. So do you have more budget to pay more for that? Or alternatively, is there some sort of compromise that we can make to land in the middle somewhere where you're going to be happy with the result? The other thing is just what we spoke about before, sort of what I witnessed as someone coming into this industry from another industry. So I also work in the advertising world that has really, really good processes in place. Was that there were no processes in place. I couldn't believe it. Like, I started out artist management, and an artist would go into a studio and I'd be like, so I haven't seen any emails about like where's the studio and what time does the session start, and like, oh, he's just going to text me the night before. That this really casual approach, which I think is great from a creative perspective, but from avoiding this topic that we just talked about in the beginning, where the calendar becomes really overloaded and there's no time for anything. From that perspective, I think it's really important to have this this template that's planned up front, which is the communication like what you just mentioned there. If the song does go in a completely different direction, I might be charging more. If you decide you want to spend more days doing this, I might be. Some people charge by the day, some people charge by the song, some people charge by the EP. It's all really different. Some people don't want to do timelines at all if they're in a privileged position to be able to do that. But there are elements like bouncing stems, instrumentals, some that you can't predict at all, but you try and have all of these conversations up front and work them into your timeline. And thinking about most industries do charge for, wear and tear of gear or the studio space, all of that sort of stuff, to make sure that you're not just constantly breaking even is really important as well. But I think if an artist has expectations around, I've looked at every single problem that's ever arisen and gone, how do I sort of fix that problem? And I think if an artist is aware that, okay, stems are an additional cost, or, whatever that might be, instrumentals do come with this fee, it avoids these awkward scenarios that can sometimes arise in a studio setting. Are there any other questions? Anna's got
I have a question, if no one else... Oh, Michael might too. So you were talking before about, if you finish at 3 o'clock in the morning and then the expectation is you're back there at 10. I mean, that's pretty normal. How do we communicate that we can't always do that, like in the spirit of communication? Contracts?
Well, so the thing that I've created is not a contract, because I spoke to artists that I work with.
That scares people sometimes.
Yeah, I manage an artist named Ainsley Wills, and we did a whole session on this where I said, how would you feel if you got this? And she said, it's a bit formal and a bit contracty, and I don't really want to have to sign something before I go in. And so I made it playful almost. It's just like a really simple template that acknowledges all of these different scenarios. So it's like, it might say, we understand that creativity can't be planned. So if you do a really late night, perhaps the next day you'll mutually decide that you'll start later, because we believe that it's really important for both you and the artist to have rest.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe having like a personal kind of manifesto about
it kind of is like a manifesto.
If we go really late, I do actually want to see my children in my lifetime, so we will be stuck.
And this is the thing where I think I've watched my partner Jono steer. He powers through projects, and many of you have probably worked with him before. He's a machine. He seems like he doesn't need to sleep, but you do from the inside see the effect that has. It doesn't necessarily compromise the record, but like you said, it might compromise like other things that you're doing, your social life or your family.
There's such a, because we did a big, so I run the guild, if you don't know. I read the survey that we did last year a lot. I've read it a lot, and a lot of what people's issues are is that they sacrifice so much in their life for their career because it means so much to them and it's so important. That's certainly been my experience. But unfortunately, other things in your life suffer massively because of that. And so, yeah, I guess it's just trying to protect our members, to give them something.
Yeah, this document I derived from working in advertising, and that's where before a project starts they risk assess and they cover off every single possible risk that could happen, and they create a contingency plan. And then I made it producer and artist friendly and made it kind of fun and added emojis and stuff. So that's something I'd be happy to share.
I wonder if the guild would, we should have something like that on our website as like a template for people to look at and make it their own.
Since having it in place, there hasn't been any conflict that has
Cool.
arisen. And not that there was conflict before, but just confusion around.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Expectations.
can I have the stems so that I can, put this backing track in my gig next week, and the producer's already on a new project then, and then that means they're staying late that night to bounce it out. It avoids all of those sorts of things coming up. Just doing a little time check. We've probably got time for one more question, I'd say. Yep.
I have so many questions, but I'll just try and focus it on one. Charlotte, as a producer manager, you would have seen things change pretty dramatically from things used to be about album projects with the single project in between. Most of my work has gone from being album projects in the last 5 years to being singles or small batches of songs. That confuses calendars even more, and it actually puts a lot of pressure on, Carly, from your point of view as well, the filling the diary thing, looking at days, and it creates opportunities. But have you noticed a big change in the way that sessions are booked and your producers are booked?
Yeah, I've noticed a huge change, and I think it's a couple of things combined. I think one, it's a financial thing. It might be easier for someone to manage the cost of a single a month or something like that, but it's also the way that a lot of the labels are advising people to release music. So whether or not someone, an independent artist might not be attached to anyone at all, but they might be watching some of their favourite bands do this thing where they release a single every 8 weeks or so. And from my perspective as a listener of music, I much prefer the idea of a full body of work. So hopefully this is just some sort of phase thing, but it's all really at the end of the day just to feed the Spotify algorithm, and because everyone's been advised that that's going to be a better way to have music connect to an audience. So I am definitely seeing that, but also I think sometimes artists they don't have a huge budget to record unless they've got a grant or funding from a label. So they're going, I'll start off with one song and then I'll work my day job for another month and then I'll have enough budget for another song. And interestingly, I've found that really confuses the calendar as well, because the last song might have taken, 2 days to record, 2 days to mix with amends. So I'll go, okay, well, the next song we'll put in 3 or 4 days in the calendar as well to cater for that. And then the next song might be completely different to the last song, and it has a saxophonist and, all these different things in there. So from a timeline perspective, I think that it is a bit more complicated for the producer. And I think there's not really a way around it, but it's definitely changed. I'm seeing a lot more of people just wanting to do one song or 2 songs or like a 4-track EP, but not so much records unless they've been funded. And the great thing is that we have so many grant opportunities, and not many places do. So for those of you who don't know, a lot of these opportunities apply to all types of creatives. So producers can also apply for grants. I've seen producers get grants to work with the artist, so they've actually secured the funding to pay for the artist's record, that kind of thing. So have a look out there. I think that might be time. I'm looking at Jess for the, yeah. Thanks to everyone for listening.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was awesome. Very helpful. Just on that, what you were just saying, Charlotte, actually, the grants thing. So Music Australia is the new, it's like the new music government organisation that it's very, very new in the last few months. And just the other day, they announced a new funding round. We had a meeting with them about it. Literally, the wording now says this funding is for producers to attend international opportunities to professionally develop. It's a new funding round, and it's about to open, or it's just opened. So go to Mix with the Masters, go to The Great Escape, go and do things overseas, bring that back to Australia and make our industry really strong. That's the idea behind it.